Well,
Okay, so we are not there yet, but welcome everybody. I'm coming up. Welcome everybody to Conversations with Colleagues. I'm Hannah Morgan, Career Sherpa, and with me today, I'm super excited to finally have a conversation with Nii Ato. We are going to be talking about sort of mental well-being during job search, and I'm super excited that everyone is interested in this topic because it's one of those things that I don't think gets enough attention. And I want to make sure that we have a chance to shed the light on some of this because it's important. So let me just make sure we're up there and on. Yeah, two. Are we up there and we're on? I think we are. Excellent. So if you are here with us today, if you could just put a comment, say hello, where you're from. If you have a question that you want to ask either of us about how job search plays with your head. Last week we talked about rejection and how that definitely impacts things, but this is more of a train your brain to be positive kind of topic and based on Nii Ato's expertise. So thank you all for being here. Good to see you, Terrence. Excellent. Great, great, great. Um, Good topic. It's the latest on his new webinar. So, yeah, I think it's definitely something that we all need to pay more attention to. So, as people are
sure.
joining us, please feel free to say hello. And if you've got a question, feel free to share that too. One of the things that I want to just have some fun with is, do you remember how we met, Nii Ato?
I believe I do. Obviously, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that our first encounter was courtesy of Mark Anthony Dyson, on
Yep.
his podcast,
Yeah.
The Voice of the Job Seekers, and we
Yep.
recorded that in, I think, December of 2019, which was just a few months after I started my practice, and it was a great honor to be included in that company. I think Sarah Johnson, you, and was there someone else?
Bob, I wasn't Bob
No, I think
McIntyre.
it's us three plus Mark. It was us three
Okay.
plus Mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's where we met and had a really great conversation. I think we're looking ahead to 2020 at the time, which feels like a lifetime ago, um,
It
before
was.
everything changed. Yeah, and trying to
Yeah.
forecast, job search trends and things to think about for 2020.
One of the things that I have always loved about you since the very first time we had that conversation with Mark Anthony Dyson was that you take sort of this holistic look at an approach to helping job seekers, which I think is so, so, so important. And I don't think it's so easy to get really tunnel vision and focus on helping job seekers with the job search process.
Right.
When you look at the bigger picture, I think it's so much more valuable to everybody involved. And can you tell sort of like a little bit more about your approach and why your background sort of makes you a good fit for this?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with the background, and then I'll go into the why behind this holistic view. So I do have a master's degree in mental health counseling, and that really informed my approach. It's a lens that I can't take off. And my most formative experience I can recall at the moment is my graduate internship. If you are from or familiar with New York City, there's a college called Baruch College, which is super diverse, one of the most diverse in the country, actually. And is a very unique career services center that I interned at because all the senior staff were PhD level counseling psychologists. And so in my training within that setting, I wasn't taught to ask my students when they walked into my office. It wasn't about what's your major and what do you want to do when you graduate. My first question was who's in your family and what have you been exposed to as far as your experiences. And so we'd sit down and do a genogram with my student so I could understand, what the mother and father's education levels were, what their jobs were, what the expectations were, what family dynamics were, and this all played into the human sitting in front of me, the student in front of me, and how they're making their choices. Because if you have a first generation college student, their parents and their family are concerned about security. Go get the most secure, best paying job you can. Go be a lawyer, work in finance or what have you, and that's the path that they're on based on family influence. But they might want to be an art major, but they are conflicted because their family's influencing them in another direction. And so that is the training that I had that got me to understand that you have to look at the whole person, not just what they might be immediately presenting to you as far as their job search concerns and goals. And in that regard, my viewpoint is that you are a whole person. So when I have a potential client that I'm speaking to, I'm concerned about the whole person, which means the personal, professional, and psychological when it comes to their job search, because those are all interconnected factors that are going to impact how you show up. If you are having mental health challenges or even just dealing with stress in your personal life, that can impact how you show up in the job search. If you think about all the roles that we play, so I'll just use myself as an example. I'm a husband. I'm about to be a father of two. I'm a brother and a son to a sibling and a father overseas. And so I have these different things going on in my life and different concerns. And those don't magically stop or go away just because I'm starting a job search or I'm trying to advance myself in my career. Those things continue. And it is important to account for those things because they might be motivating, influencing, or impeding us with our goals in the job search or career advancement process. And that's the lens that I take in terms of trying to support people to look at all those and consider those factors as they pop up and are relevant.
I love that. I love that. So, do you think that job seekers are their own worst enemies oftentimes when it comes to job search? And why do you think that happens?
We can all be our own worst enemy in
Right.
several different ways, right? We all come with our personal histories, experiences, baggage, trauma, all sorts of different things. This can even be work-related trauma, right? And we have to acknowledge that as a real thing. And the consideration, the thought I'm having right now is about confidence. We can get in our own ways, especially in the area of confidence, which impacts how we show up and what we do in the job search. If you'll bear with me for a moment, I just want to give a football analogy. Well, soccer in the United States, but I'm a huge football fan. And football is very unique in that they talk about player confidence, the commentators, more so than any other sport that I'm aware of. I watch basketball, I watch baseball and football, and they don't talk about confidence in those realms as much as they do in soccer. The reason being that when it comes to football or soccer, that there's so many factors out of your control, and it's so hard to score a goal that players need to have confidence in order to try things, to try that pass, to try that shot, to try and take on a defender and get around him. It takes confidence for them to pull off the moves that they're trying to make. And so if we transpose that to the job, I'm sorry, when players are lacking confidence, things just don't work. They're tentative in their shots. They make bad passes, they make poor choices on the field, and things don't turn out so well. If we transpose that to the job search, if we're lacking confidence in ourselves, our choices might not be great. We might count ourselves out of things we're well qualified for. We might not be bold enough to make the ask that we need of a networking contact. We might not show up and as our full confident selves in an interview situation and really display who we are and what we have to offer. And so we can be our own worst enemy as far as the internal dialogue that we have and the messages that we are telling to ourselves, which impact the messages that we speak out loud to the world, our believability in terms of what we're saying, and so many different things. And so when it comes to our confidence, that can be one of the first places to look in terms of job seekers getting their own way.
Yeah. You say that like I hope that people were really listening to what you said because um, you said it so fast because I know you think this all the time and you've said it more than once, right? But I want that really to sink into people that it's the confidence factor that is so important, and that is influenced by so many other factors, right? So one of the articles that you wrote that was sort of the impetus that I really thought was awesome, and one of the reasons why you're here today was that excuse me, really great article. I'm trying to find it right now. Don't approach your job search from a position of lack. You are enough. And you go on to say that, you know, we oftentimes as job seekers, and this gets into sort of the confidence level, a deficit mindset, right? Where we're
Mhm.
just telling ourselves these things, or we're not applying. So there were five questions, I think, that you
Mhm.
went about saying are going to help job seekers shift from that deficit mindset to one of more of power, control, and confidence.
Mhm.
And the first one was, because I'm not sure that you remember them all, was um, instead of job seekers, complaining about or feeling that they're a victim of whatever situation it is,
Hmm.
if they can ask themselves these questions. One is, can I get employers to focus on, how can I get employers to focus on my strengths,
Hmm.
right? We can't make them want to hire us, but we can take more control and power and make a better and do a better job at making sure that employers know what our strengths are, right?
Right.
It's not easy to talk about our strengths.
No, not at all. But yeah, I think that so number one, both Hannah and I would love to empower all of you just to understand that you do have more power than you think in the job search process. And we're simply encouraging you to control the things you can control. That starts out with how you tell your stories, how you present and frame them, both within your marketing materials and then verbally when you are you have the opportunity to interview or network. And in terms of getting people to focus on your strengths, it's about telling stories that speak to those strengths that you do have. I'm remembering a client that I've been working with, and she shared with me how she's really good at influencing, even if she doesn't have direct power over people. And so that is a way for her to showcase communication skills, influencing ability, and that's the way that she adds value within her workspace. And so she was able to share how there were certain projects or initiatives that would not have gotten done were it not for her ability to have individual conversations, um, understand the under what was not being said, and then build consensus by bringing people together, knitting together, weaving together the bits and pieces she picked up, and that's how she influenced that power amongst her colleagues. And so you can write a resume or tell an interview story that demonstrates your ability to influence in that way. So it might be talking on your resume about meeting with several different colleagues, understanding their needs, formulating a proposal or a plan that moved project X forward, or similar to what I just outlined in an interview situation, narrating the story, meeting with different people, reading between the lines, and then getting people all on the same page. And so when you are looking to draw people's attention to what you want them to look at, you point at it. You point at it in your resume, you point at it in the stories that you tell, and a big piece of it is the how. You may have the same technical skills as someone else, but you might arrive at your solution a little bit differently. And so it's including that how piece that might demonstrate your strength and help you to stand out as an individual or unique within a crowd.
Hiring is so much more than just a skills match.
Hmm.
And right, so oftentimes I hear job seekers say, "Oh, I was a perfect match for that job, and they didn't give it to me, or I didn't get an interview." And my first response is, "Well, you couldn't have been a perfect match because they didn't talk to you or
Hmm.
they didn't bring you back." And because it's more than what the whole position is more than what we see on paper. And the
Right.
same is true for the job seeker, the individual applying for that job. They are so much more than what appears on paper. And the only way someone can really truly understand how unique and the value that you bring to the table is by having a conversation. And that can
Right.
happen in an interview, but that can happen through networking. That can
Hmm.
happen in informational conversations. That can
Right.
happen just in conversations. The other question that you ask the job seeker to think about to sort of shift their mind, their thinking is, do I have at least 50% of the job posting requirements, and can I learn the rest on the job? And I find that interesting. And I think someone commented on 50%. That sounds low. But tell me your logic for that. Having that job seeker say, do I have at least 50% of the requirements, and can I learn the rest on the job? Or how easy will it be for me to learn the rest on the job?
Sure. The reason, so in the past, I've said maybe 60 or 70, but I think I was intentional this time saying 50 because I want people to open up possibility for themselves a little bit more and not prematurely foreclose on opportunities because they don't have everything in the job description. This is speaking to women, this is speaking to professionals of color who tend to more often count themselves out. Um, Speaking to recruiters, speaking to hiring managers, a job posting is a wish list. In my last conversation on my broadcast last week, I had a recruiter who's recruited for Twitter, Facebook, and other really large companies. And we have to remember the human being writes this job posting. There's not some magic database of job postings. They speak to a hiring manager, they might speak to some colleagues, and then a human sits down and writes out the requirements. And they're hoping to find someone who meets as many of these things as possible. I've also read a stat that says that only about 38% of the time, the most qualified person on paper actually gets the job. And so that means that over, 50, 60% of the time, there's someone walking into that interview room and convincing them that they're the person that the employer did not know that they needed. And so this is why I'm trying to open up that possibility, because you might have, let's say, the core 50% of what it takes to do the job really well. And there might be some more wish listy type items that are nice to have but not required for the job that you can learn or pick up, because every company is different. Their systems are different. Their workflows are different. And those things that can only be learned on the job. And so this isn't a shot in the dark approach, but really, saying if I have the core of what they're looking for, and the other things are kind of nice to have or I can pick up, within the proprietary setting that I'm going to be in, then I think I've got a good chance to put myself up for this opportunity, because I bring these other intangibles that might not be listed, but they are resolving the pain points that the employer has.
I think that I love this philosophy, because I think too often I see women and job changers, people who are shifting from one career option to another. They always feel like the odds are stacked against them. But with your approach, right, if you're thinking about, okay, what are the core 50% that I've got? And then what other value can I add? And oh, by the way, how much of this might I be able to learn on the job? Obviously, if you don't know, if you come to the conclusion that there is no way you can come up to speed on some of the stuff that you need to know, then there's that reality check. But I think we too often weed ourselves out and don't throw our hat in the ring. And you can't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket. So
Right. I hear that. And
right.
just as a follow on, I think both of you and I would agree that a targeted job search is better than a scattershot job search. And so this isn't me saying that if you meet 50% requirements for every job out there for 100 jobs, you're going to apply. It's you having said, okay, what's the industry I want to be in? What are the target companies within this industry that really align with my values, my priorities, my needs and wants as an employee? This is the self-empowerment piece. And then, okay, this is the skill set that I have, and these the jobs I think make the most sense for me to target. Within these companies I'd love to work for, do I meet at least half, if not more, of the qualifications? The 50% being the lowest bar, right? I don't want you to go below that.
Right.
Then, can you make up whatever that gap is, whether it's 10, 20 or 30% gap? Can you make that up with other things? Because again, no one is, or very few people, very, very few have every single thing on that job posting. And so you have the chance to be the person that might not meet everything, but is the fit that they needed, that they didn't know they needed. And that's what we're hoping for.
Exactly. That's what we're hoping for, right? And that gives that, I think, that alone can be empowering to a job seeker. So imagine you are that job seeker who has 60% of what they're looking for, and a company that you really want to work for, and they give you a call. How great does that make you feel, right?
You'll be
It
psyched.
can
Yeah.
happen, right? Right. So that
Yeah.
feels so much better than, applying to 100 companies that you know nothing about, and you've got all the qualifications and not hearing anything.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other question that you encourage job seekers to ask themselves is, how can I lean into and highlight my current skills?
hmm Yeah, I think that it's important to do a retrospective, and for many different reasons when you're looking for a new job. But when it comes to your skills, it's understanding clearly what your value add is and what your strengths are. But I want to add the caveat that you should also focus on the things you're strongest in, plus the skills you enjoy using the most. That intersection of what you're good at, but what you enjoy doing, that's where we really want to focus your attention. Of course, having a good command of everything that you're good at is helpful. And then you can focus and prioritize the things that you enjoy doing as well. And so this is looking back at the different roles you've played. What have you been successful as far as which business challenges you've been really successful at resolving? What skills and responsibilities are you often executing? And therefore, you built up a level of specialization or expertise. What have you become known for, or the go-to person within your companies? Are you the person that can really resolve any sort of operational technical issue? Are you the person that can, resolve any contentious relationship? What are you called upon to do? And so by really understanding those things, you can then build stories around those skill sets in order to put them on your resume and, of course, tell them when networking, interviewing, in order to best advertise or sell yourself in those opportunities. But it all comes from that internal understanding first. Know thyself. You need to know thyself better than anyone else and be able to articulate those skills and those abilities. And then thinking about, well, how do I do these things a little bit differently than someone else? There's an example I wrote up in an article a long time ago. Let's say someone leads focus groups, in market research, and their claim to fame is that they're able to often ask questions that make their focus groups think a little bit differently, that generate really interesting feedback that might lead into, product feature upgrades or things like that, right? And so every market research focus group person is going to be asking questions, but the way in which this person asks their questions and the results that or the response it generates, that's what might make them stand apart. And so it's by looking at the skills that you might have in common with everyone who's competing with you, but what's your unique flavor or flair or just way of doing things that is going to help you stand apart. That's what we want to focus on in addition to doing the whole skills review.
Here's the other reason I love that is because when I've worked with job seekers to help them identify some of the stories, their accomplishments, and I ask them to talk about it, like, okay, now we're going to practice. Tell us your story. I watch them and their eyes start to twinkle because they feel so proud about what they've accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get to see that as much when we're working remotely with somebody, but when we're face to face with people and you can see the twinkle in their eye and their whole demeanor changes. They sit up straight. They sound more confident.
Mm-hmm.
Just that, the feeling of pride, and I, that's a weird word sometimes to use, but they feel good talking about themselves. They don't feel like they're
Mm-hmm.
bragging, and that's what I want
Right.
job seekers to be able to lead with all the time. That's the power of your strengths. When you're talking about what you're good at doing, like you feel good, and that's where you should be. And that's where we
Yes,
should be
definitely.
working too. I
Mm-hmm.
think we forget that.
Yeah, yeah. Tapping into that zone of, this might sound cliche, but that zone of brilliance, that's I think what you and I really hope for when it comes to our clients. In my last full-time job, I'll never forget how often the stories that I heard verbally over the phone did not match what was on paper on their resumes. And that disconnect was often a huge challenge in terms of why they weren't making the progress they thought they would with their resume. You'd hear their voice change, they'd light up. And it's often asking us a question simple as, well, what are you most proud of within this current role? And everything changes from there. And so I'd encourage everyone out there, if you're looking to redo your resume or thinking about what stories to tell in your job search, start with, what are you most proud of? Or what were you recognized for? What did people pat you on the back for, send you a complimentary email about? Starting with those things can really be a great source of inspiration in terms of building your materials, even building a brand, because there might be a theme that interconnects the different things that you are most proud of. And that can be a way to start branding yourself and saying, well, I want to be known for this.
Even performance appraisals can be helpful, though
Hmm.
they're not always as helpful as we want them to be. I just came
Depends on the
across
company,
one.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I just came across one of my old ones. I'm like, oh yeah, that can go right in the garbage. I don't need to see that anymore.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
but but sometimes we do need that. We need that outside influence to remind us of what our strengths are, especially if we start getting sort of down in the dumps or we have self-doubt.
Right.
The other question that you ask is, what would it look like for me to sell myself better? I love that question. These are really good questions,
Oh, thank
right?
you. Thank you. Yeah.
What
Um,
does it look like if you were to sell yourself better?
I think when I frame that question, I was thinking about someone trying to do the mental exercise of imagining their best self when it comes to telling their own stories. Because a lot of our clients, I'm sure you've had this experience, of met with us and said, I don't know how to sell myself. I'm not very good at telling these stories and things like that. And there are a number of internal blocks that might be happening. It could be, first off, not fully understanding their worth or value and what they do well. It could be nerves, which is natural to all of us. I get nervous even before LinkedIn Live still. It could be that they've received all these messages externally that they're not that great in whatever way, based on their gender, their racial background, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. They're messages from the world that tell you that you are not as valued and or you can't show up in a confident way in the job search. And we all have to try and unpack these things. And so the first step is bring these things to awareness. What are my current blocks? And what is getting in the way of me telling my stories? It could be even as simple as not fully, some people thinking, oh, I'll just do my job, which is a very common
I
mindset.
hear that a
And
lot.
so, yeah. And if you don't think your own work was remarkable, then you can't make someone else think your work was remarkable or noteworthy. And so it's identifying those blocks and then, well, what do I do to counteract this particular blockage? And so it's looking back again, this retrospective, what have you done? What's the evidence and the facts here? And so in the job search, we're not asking you to make anything up. If you saved your company $1 million, you saved them $1 million. Now, how do you go about telling that story? Was the fact that you noticed something was broken and you decided to fix it and came up with a really innovative solution? This is you sharing yourself and sharing the story of what you did. It's not bragging. It's not making things up. You're just letting someone understand, letting them into your world to help them understand and see your value. And so in terms of selling yourself better, what are the shifts you need to make that help you gain comfort in telling your story, that help you to feel authentic in telling the story? And then how can you provide better content and framing and context in that story? And so that is the underlying message beneath that question of what would look like for me to sell myself better is, how can I remove blocks? How can I improve my storytelling? And how can I show up better in these opportunities?
Those are so great. At one point, and I'll share it again at the end of our broadcast, but I'm going to put the link to that article that you wrote on LinkedIn, that post, because I think it's so powerful. And it doesn't really matter where you are in your job search or how long you've been doing it. I think all of the questions and just that reframing how we think and what we're saying to ourselves during job search is so important. Alex has a question sort of statement. How do you bring your personality into the interview? Not your skills. The skills get the interview, but your personality gets the offer. So do you have any tips on specifically what a job seeker can do to make sure their personality comes through? Because oftentimes we'll say, oh, I'm really energetic, right? But that's not
Uh-huh.
that's not quite what we mean here, right? How can you
Right.
prove that you are high energy and people enjoy working with you? Like,
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's a really good question, Alex. And I want to be, thoughtful in my answer. The first place in my mind went was, I heard a speaker, I think her name is Carla Harris. I think she's published a number of books and she's quite well known. And she shared this concept of, pardon me, showing up as your full authentic self, but that doesn't mean that you're showing everything all the time. And I want to be clear as I caveat this, right? You show up with the parts of yourself that you need at a given time, right? And so in an interview setting, you are going to not be, catering or putting on any false pretenses, but you are going to be showing up with your genuine enthusiasm for the role or the job because you targeted a company you actually want to work for. And then you are trying to conduct yourself in the way that you normally would with another fellow human being. And what I mean by this is that you're having a conversation. And so, Alex, the same way you might have a conversation with me, were we to meet, at a coffee shop and strike up a conversation, or if we were to meet at a party and we get introduced, by a mutual friend, you would treat me with respect and openness, and you would be your normal self in that situation. And that's really all we're looking for. If you're funny, you might find opportunities to use humor in that interview setting, but read the room, right? If you are very energetic, you might bring that as well, but again, read the room. And it's about just simply, sorry, let me not say simply, because that makes it seem that this is not an issue. But it's trying to stay true to yourself and what's often true to you. And so if you tend to be someone who takes a pause before they respond, continue to take that pause before you respond in that conversation, because it's how you are. If you're someone who tells really great stories in order to prove a point, continue doing that. you of course are going to tailor things a little bit to the setting because the interview is a particular type of environment. But if you do yourself a disservice by not showing up as your full self, because they're not hiring you, they're hiring a representative who showed up to try and get that job. And when the real you shows up to work 5 days a week, 40 plus hours that week, 40 plus hours a week, that real you might not be satisfied and might not have a good fit with the environment because the real you did not interview. So I hope that is helpful in understanding. I'm happy to clarify, but it's don't do anything different than you normally do just because it's an interview. Just be yourself and feel empowered that yourself is enough is the underlying message here.
Can I just add one little bit to that? Be the best version of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because sometimes people are too much themselves and they don't realize that, on a first date, it's, you don't want to be your full self. There's a little bit that you're holding back. I think that, you want to be the best version of you. You on a good day,
Mm-hmm.
not you on your worst day. Right?
Yeah, no, definitely not you on your worst day. I think that I might push back a little bit on that, Hannah, respectfully, in saying that when it comes to dating, right? If you are, I'm not saying we all have a little bit of crazy, right? This is not my original words, right? We all have a little bit of crazy. And if you don't let the person you're dating know what your flavor crazy looks like, you won't know if they really can rock with you as a partner, as a romantic partner, right? And
Well,
so,
at some point. So
at some point, yeah, you can't let everything out the first day. I get that.
Right, not the first
It's a
date.
dance,
Maybe
right?
the second
Can you
date they
trust
can
them and
see
all
my
that?
crazy.
Yeah.
A
But
little
at
bit
the
of
end
my
of
crazy.
the a little bit, yeah. But it's showing that little bit of spark or flavor you have from the get-go, because we all have a unique brand of energy. We all have a unique way in which we connect and build and form relationships, and a unique perspective and way that we even communicate. And so I think where I think we do agree is that we're trying to say, don't overly compromise who you are for that situation, because at the end of the day, you lose and the employer loses as well if they hired your representative, not the real you.
Yeah. So here, Alex answered his own question. You need to weave in soft skill into your answer. And so that's this very simple version, Alex. And we absolutely agree. It's just not easy to do. Sorry. Bringing your personality also requires the interviewer to take the lead, and showing this is okay in a professional manner. Each of us is a brand ambassador. So I would say oftentimes companies, recruiters are not so good at necessarily being authentic or genuine or being good at brand ambassadors. So they can do what they do. I'm going to be the best of me. Because,
Yeah.
and I'm watching what they're doing. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm paying attention to that. Because companies are required to do this better now. They are their employer brand is way more important than it used to be, and their reputation is out there. And more importantly, job seekers are savvy. They are smarter today. They're doing more research. They're being more picky about who they work for. At least they should be.
Definitely.
And so companies have to step up their game.
Yeah,
Can you
I hear that
believe?
100%. Oh, go ahead.
We're done.
Oh.
Our time is up together.
Oh man, that's so fast.
I know. I told you it was going to be fast. Okay, so this is not the right banner. So next week it's going to be Shelley. Shelley Piedmont is going to talk about changing your mindset from I can't to I can. That is noon Tuesday next week. Nii Ato, you have you have some lives going on. Can you just share those with us?
Yeah, sure. So I have two upcoming LinkedIn Lives. The first one is coming up this Thursday. It's a time change, 9 a.m. Eastern, because my guest is in California. She's doing this before she goes to work because she's awesome. So I'll be interviewing June Calroso. She is the founder of Build with June Consulting, and she's also a technical recruiter at Meta. And she will be talking about demystifying working with recruiters and exploring a whole host of topics, of course, how to partner with them effectively. But she wants to provide specific job search tips for women. We're going to talk about imposter syndrome and self-doubt and a whole host of other things. So that's coming up this Thursday, March 17th, 9 a.m. And then next week, I'll be interviewing my good friend, Nadia Diala. And we're going to be talking about dealing with rejection and kind of pushing forward despite what you might be experiencing in the job search process. That's next Thursday, the 24th at 12 p.m. Eastern.
I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here with me today. It was so fun to finally get you online together. We'll do this again soon. There's so much more we have to explore. So thank you.
For sure. Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. If you guys don't follow Nii Ato, please do go follow him. Was it this year that you were LinkedIn's, you were on LinkedIn's top
voices.
Top voices
Yeah,
in job search and careers to follow. So he's definitely worthy of that. It's such a pleasure. Thank you, Nii Ato.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I appreciate you.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a good week.
Bye. Take care.